Hello and welcome to this edition of the program People, Politics and Power. I am Imoni Amarere. In July, leaders of the West African Regional Economic Bloc, Ecowas, held the 65th session of its Authority of Heads of State and Government here in the nation's capital, Abuja. That meeting deliberated on a range of socio-political, economic, and security challenges confronting the sub-region. The hitherto 15-member bloc has since been reduced to 12 following the withdrawal of military-governed 3 member states of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger from the body and to forming the Alliance of Sahel States. They have resolved not to return to the bloc. The Abuja summit addressed, amongst others, keeping the bloc together, the sustenance of democracy and good governance in individual member countries, enhanced regional trade, the growing menace of drug trafficking, and the security threats in the region. Along this line, the summit's strategic focus was on the Ecowas standby force as an institutional framework to combat the escalating insecurity in the sub-region. It flowed from an earlier consultative meeting of commandants of 3 designated Ecowas training centers of excellence, coordinated by the Ecowas Directorate of Peacekeeping and Regional Security. Although the concept of a standby force has been on the drawing board for several years, it has not materialized because of a lack of political will and the paucity of funds for its effective takeoff. It is estimated that at least $2.4 billion is needed for the establishment of the force. The force has become more imperative because of the severity of threats of terrorism in several member countries, including Nigeria, which has the added burden of insurgency, banditry, kidnapping for ransom, and other violent crimes. But how feasible is the standby force with a divided house? How can its objectives be achieved if member states are working at cross purposes? Where, when, and how will the funding needed come from when member states are unable and or unwilling to meet the statutory financial obligations to the Commission? Now, this much concern was expressed by Nigeria's Foreign Affairs Minister, Yusuf Tuga, and the President of the ECOWAS Commission, Omar Toure, at the summit in July.
Our Ministers of Finance and Defense have met to develop plans to mobilize the funds needed to establish an ECOWAS standby force. This is a formation that will help safeguard our community against terrorism and unconstitutional changes of government. Equally noteworthy is the ECOWAS Social Protection Framework and Operational Plan, a bold initiative aimed at addressing immediate social needs and improving the living standards of ECOWAS citizens.
We shall examine the operationality of the standby force and how much value it can add to security in the sub-region. How sustainable can it be in the face of economic challenges in member states? These are the issues we'll be looking at on the program today, and I'm joined right here in the studio by Mr. Kayode Bolaji, who is a security, governance, and foreign policy specialist. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
We are also joined virtually by Mr. Paul Ejime, who is an international affairs analyst. Thank you, Paul, for finding time to join us.
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you on. Right, so let's begin with you, Paul. The ECOWAS as a body has undergone various phases in its development. And of course, like I said at the beginning, the ECOWAS standby force has been one of those issues that has been on the table for such a long time. In your view, why do you think it has taken this long to get it underway?
So you're right. Standby force for ECOWAS is not a new thing. Actually, there is one. Maybe be it moribund.
I ask you the same question. Why you think it has taken this long to get the ECOWAS standby force off the ground?
Thank you. The ECOWAS standby force have been on, well, to say, to get it operationalized, it's different because they've been available. They are available. Remember, this function was the function that ECOMON was doing in the 90s, you know, when we had issues in Liberia, Sierra Leone. You know, it was still under the OAU, and then when AU was formed in the early 2000s, it became, you know, the standby force. So Nigeria has actually been the lead for many years, even before it was officially created. Now, operationalizing the standby force is a different thing because it's a brigade. It's a brigade of different military, police, and some civilian elements also to not just to use violence to solve issues, but they also have early warning operations across Africa. I know there's one I think in Guinea-Bissau. I'm not sure about the other one. Now, looking at the issue that we have with those three countries that you mentioned earlier, of course, any security expert will know that military action is not the best approach. It's the same thing if you have insurgency or if you have issues within the country, not insurgency. Now, if you have violent issues within the country, deploying your military should not be the first approach. Why? Because military people are only trained to use violence for violence. And when you have human security at stake, you know, you try to look for other means of solving the problem. The military can be used for non-military activities if you still want to at least put that posture out there. But they've been available. I think the last meeting with the Chief of Defense Staffs that met was to basically tell the ECOWAS heads of states to say, okay, well, if you want this to go this way, it's also very expensive. It's very expensive. Who is going to foot the bill, you know? And most of the time, it doesn't end well. So from the beginning, some of us as analysts have been warning to say, I think there's monopoly of violence before the Cold War is different from what we have now. You know, it's not just the monopoly of violence; it's also the terrain. You know, some military operatives are better at other terrain than the others. So, do you want to have casualties? You know, are there other ways we could look at? You know, before deploying the standby force, they should be there. They should be there, to, you know, to warn enemies of democracy that this can be deployed. But is that what we should do now? I don't think so.
Well, some will argue that when ECOMOG was put in place, it was situation specific. It was not exactly a standby force. Although after it was put in place for the Liberian crisis, it also was used for the Sierra Leonean crisis. But after that, it was disbanded. Now we're talking of a standby force against the backdrop of increasing insecurity in the sub-region as a whole. And take note that when ECOMOG was formed, only very few of the members of ECOWAS at that time actually contributed troops. Maybe 2, 3, 4 countries contributed troops. Yeah. But here we're talking of a standby force that ought to include every member of the ECOWAS bloc?
Yes, I'm aware of that. Like I said, there is a standby force. I think it's commanded by a major general in the Nigerian Armed Forces. There are police elements. There are other countries involved. But you know, when ECOWAS or AU, you know, when you make positions like this for a standby force, remember, voluntary countries have to volunteer, you know, military officials, police officials to join. And that usually depends on how much they're willing to give or sacrifice, you know, in terms of that. In most regional governments, the star country takes the lead, like what we have in the ECOWAS, of course. We know it's Nigeria. In Southern Africa, it's South Africa. In Northern Africa, all the regions have a standby force, you know, and the larger majority of the contribution comes from the star countries, you know, as I've mentioned. But again, I want to mention that our case in ECOWAS, it's a bit, even for Nigerians, as a security expert, I wouldn't want Nigeria to donate military operatives the way we did during the ECOMOG. That's why I said earlier, monopoly of violence is different, you know, before the Cold War and then after the Cold War. The Cold War, you could have ammunitions, you can have numbers, and you can threaten your opponent, you know, to submission. But yeah, it's very easy to get weapons, and especially when a nation is willing. These three nations you've mentioned, it's not just the people that took over the government. I think the whole country, a larger percentage of the whole country is behind them. And so to deploy military people would be catastrophic.
I don't think that the standby force is actually aimed at one particular country or one country that is on being governed by the military or not. It's supposed to be a standby force that could intervene in any situation, especially against the backdrop of the kind of security challenges we're having on the ECOWAS sub-region. But I'll come back to you. Let me bring in Mr. Ejime at this point in time. Paul, thank you for rejoining us.
Okay, yeah. You raised the question about why standby force now. It flows from the history of ECOMOG. ECOMOG, let's remember that put out the fires in Liberia and Sierra Leone, was the ECOWAS ceasefire monitoring, group. That is actually what ECOMOG is. And then after that, there has been some evolution when those wars were ended, and then ECOWAS now decided to say, okay, let's have a standby force. So there are supposed to be one. There have been many chiefs of staff of ECOWAS standby forces, standby force that we have had from many ECOWAS countries. But it's not functional. And then now maybe the chiefs of staff, the leaders, they want to reactivate it. But you should ask, why is it not functioning? Otherwise, what has made the one existing that is dysfunctional can also be a problem for the one you are this one that they have, which is very more elaborate and ambitious. But the question, you raised it in your preamble. Where are the troops coming from? Who will pay? And then before you talk about the logistics, arming them and so on, this will require finance. Some of them are not paying, you see, they are not paying their dues. How will they be able to bring about to pay this kind of money? Or are they going to rely on development partners? And if that is the case, then it is dead on arrival. So what is there is that, yes, they are trying to respond to the emerging security threat, terrorism, cybercrime, piracy at the sea, the Gulf, and all that. But I think for me, It is not by going kinetic. My colleague said it. Going kinetic is the last resort. Because remember, you are operating a democracy. Why would you now require the military? And you are against military rule. Why will you now go and get the military to begin to show up democracy? So there is an inconsistency there that they need to look at. The other thing is that I hope that it is not, he mentioned there are two countries where ECOWAS now has missions, military missions. They are not standby forces. One is in the Gambia, the other one is in Guinea. And then they are trying to make sure that, there are no external aggression. It is not to fight anything within the country. And I hope that is not what the leaders are trying to do, because this question of reactivating the standby force was in response to the military coups in the four countries, Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, and Niger. I hope that it is not that they are trying to use it to maintain power, because that will be a misnomer. That will be, against the democratic principles that they are all fighting for. The leaders should instead go for good governance, and it wouldn't cost them as much. That it won't cost them up to 2-point-something billion to raise that, if they are all doing what they are supposed to do in their respective countries. That is delivering the benefits of because what are they trying to fight? What is the root causes? What are the root causes of this insurgency or whatever you call it? It is because some people feel alienated. It is because of inequality. It is because of corruption. It is because of bad governance. Why wouldn't they now go and tackle that? Because the 2-point-something billion they're talking about, that is if they're ever going to raise it, is going to be used essentially to go and purchase weapons from other countries. They are not manufacturing these weapons. Imagine what that amount can do in bringing in, prosecuting community development programs. So I think it's wrong-headed at the moment. Of course, it is not a bad idea, but now, at this moment, let them look for something tangible, something concrete, by also starting to address the root causes of the reason they want to employ standby force. Because if they do that, then there will be no need for these large 5,000 troops, and then with the maybe civilian and then police components. So let them get the priority right. Yeah, but there is no question that that might be required. If you have a collective, a coalition of forces that will be dealing with insurgency or terrorists from across the region. That is that can be done. But the way it is being addressed, it appears it is when there is a leader feels threatened, then he will go and ask for ECOWAS to give them standby force. Just like Sierra Leone, President Madabio is doing now. He wants a military force to be sent to show up his power after an election that was very divisive. The election is the one that is creating the problem. So why don't you address the root causes instead of the symptoms? I think the idea of standby force is wrong-headed, and I think they should not use it to maintain power. Let them use it to fight terrorism. And you know what has happened in fighting terrorism? What they have done. There is no commitment among the leaders. That is what it requires. They have now first to govern, to lead their individual countries, and then get it across the region before they can talk about, a way of, dealing or getting out insurgency or terrorism. It's not by using kinetic force to go and using this humongous amount that many of them can ill afford. And you heard what the Nigerian minister said. From where is it coming? In those days of the Ecowas, it was Ghana, Nigeria, and a few countries that actually boosted it. Nigeria is not in a position to do that. It is fighting its own Boko Haram. Ghana has its own problem. So there has been some dynamic shifts, and now you have to respond with strategic, with a strategy that will deal with the root causes of what you are trying to achieve, what you are trying to get rid of, instead of multiplying the problem.
So, Paul, if you say that the standby force is not entirely a bad idea, when, and do you think that it would be appropriate to bring it into being or to operationalize it? Because you say this is not the time for it. When is the appropriate time?
No, I haven't said that is not the time for it. I am saying what they have is there on the ground. They have a chief of staff of a standby force, but it's not working. Why don't they concentrate on that and leave it at that very slim level, and then but concentrate on delivering the benefits of governance, of democracy, which will take care of the reason you have all these, disenchantment. It is when people are not satisfied with what the governance, that is when they take up arms. So why don't you go and address those issues at the root cause level before, so that you will deal with the problem once and for all?
All right, Mr. Balaji, let me take it from there. If this force were to come into existence fully and become operational, what kind of model would you be looking at? Is it one that will require getting resources from development partners and from other, and even from member states to put the force together? Or would you then recommend that each member state should fund his own troops that are going into that standby force? Like we had during the Ecowas days. I know, for instance, that member states who contributed troops were required to fund their own troops that were contributed to Ecowas.
Yes, I mean, that would be ideal, of course. I am always of the opinion that we should reduce the amount of donations we get from foreign partners when it comes to domestic issues. Even military officers would prefer that, because usually when you get donors, they have their own ideas different from what you want to achieve, and their ideas become a priority. So what is ideal, of course, is to get member states to fund the brigade. There are different ways of doing it. It could be that they have a number of troops depending on, how big their troops are, But of course, for ECOWAS, Nigeria will always be the lead. And like my colleague said, we are fighting at all fronts. We need to be careful, even though we know that what is happening in another ECOWAS state will affect us eventually. So that cooperation is very important. My understanding of kinetic and non-kinetic, and this is something I have studied for many years, that I've written about, is the future of warfare cannot be kinetic. Otherwise, everybody will die. I mean, it's not a very appealing summary statement, but there is no monopoly of violence anymore. And the idea of human security should be paramount, because when people know that their life is very important, they know how to defend the state more than the military. When people that live within the state can be sure that the state takes them seriously, able to provide all the different dimensions of human security, economic security, political security, personal security, they will protect the state. They know how to protect the state. They are the ones that give the early warning signals. They know when a foreigner is coming. They know when somebody is planning evil. They know how to report to appropriate authorities. Military people can't be everywhere. Police can't be everywhere. So you still depend on the people. Now, if we look at, so I've been using the word peculiar. If we look at ECOWAS, or Africa in general, when OAU was created, it didn't look at issues around military intervention of other states because of the idea of non-intervention, non-interference, rather. But of course, after the Cold War, a lot of activities, weapons have been transferred everywhere, aggressions increase, and then bad governance also added to it, So these insurrections, this demand for justice will continue until there is human security, until people's values are respected, until human beings are respected across Africa. Now, for us to now think of using military intervention to, it's like changing the narrative. This is what people are asking for. This is what you're asking for. It's still not going to stop the injustice.
Is the idea of the force essentially for intervention purposes, or indeed to guide against more violence in the sub-region from whatever source? The current situation we have in the sub-region, where there is a lot of terrorism, banditry, kidnapping for ransom, and even violent drug and human trafficking rings.
Eventually, I get your point. Eventually, when you use it's like inviting the military people into a situation where police people can take, where policemen can handle. You are inviting violence. There is no other way. Military people are not trained to use tear gas or to use water cannons. When you say military intervention, when you say standby force, when you deploy them, when you operationalize them, you are calling for violence. That's the only thing they know.
Yeah, but
they are agents of violence.
But especially against the backdrop of a situation where those you are having to confront have moved from civil practices to high-grade military practices. Terrorists, for instance, drug traffickers, for instance, human traffickers, for instance, who will not wait for you to confront them before they confront you, for instance.
So as an expert in security and governance, so that's a product. That's the end product. Something happened before then. So we're looking for sustainable peace. We're looking for stabilization. That's the goal of every police or military action. Is how do we stabilize? At the after intervention, if you cannot see that, you should not go in. Because there must be an exit strategy. If the exit strategy is also going to bring in more violence, I wouldn't advocate for interference from a military point of view. Now, when you say the idea of a standby force, like I said in my the first intervention I made, I said, yes, they have the early warning centers, which is also part of their mandates, They have a lot of intervention. As a matter of fact, if I'm to give guidance to the standby force, I would say they should do a lot of mapping, to know the activities happening in different countries. Yes, these days we've seen military chiefs advising, political leaders, even on how to use them, which I really want to applaud. Because sometimes politicians don't know how to use their military. We have terrorism. But terrorism is not an act that, you can hardly pinpoint one or two countries that have succeeded in dealing with terrorism. And it's because of this same thing we are talking about. You cannot uproot these activities just by violence. Yes, violence should be there so that your opponents will know that you're ready. When they cross a line, you will give them fire for fire. But we should always look at the root causes, and that's where we have the non-kinetic approaches. We have the DDR programs. We have other programs of transitional justice. we have other activities that we can use to ameliorate, but also to deal with some of the issues.
All right, let's bring in Paul now if he's still very much with us. Paul, would you say, for instance, that perhaps the idea of a standby force is a copy from the playbook of the Non-Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO? Can you hear me, Paul?
Sorry, come again.
Yes, I was asking if...
Yes, I can.
Yeah,
Please repeat the question.
if the idea of a standby force is actually copied from the playbook of the Non-Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO.
I don't know how, but it's not wrong to copy anything, good, like, for instance. After all, much of what the AU is doing today in terms of their protocol on democracy and good governance.
Indeed, we appear to be having a lot of network challenges with Paul today, but let me pose that question to you.
Yes, I think so, but like I said earlier, it was something that came up when the African Union, started in the early 2000s. We had the Ecowas before then, and they were to actually have an African Union standby force. That was the idea ab initio. But then it became necessary, instead of just having that one standby force, to have it at a regional level. So every region in Africa actually have a standby force. They are, like I said, it's a brigade of that regional force to act, to intervene when there is need because of a lot of insurrections happening, criminal activities, and where a region deems it fit to act on behalf of another country that is in their need, they activate such brigades.
So if that is working in other sub-regional groups within the continent, why is that of the ECOWAS bloc different?
Yeah, I know some other brigades are also struggling, especially the one in East Africa also. Our region is complicated in terms of, you've mentioned it, terrorism is almost across board. Religious violent activities also, it's almost across board. And because of our past also, the way democracy came to West Africa, there are issues of how to historicize some of these activities, to be able to bring about a solution. So those things are our main challenges. But again, I feel we could push for a standby force that is geared towards non-kinetic activities. The fact that we have a force means that they are kinetic. They have the absolute, yes, if ECOWAS is able to fund them with the needs that they have, but it's expensive. The money is not there. Who's going to fund that? Yes, they have two scenarios. I think there's one, 2.something billion.
2.4 billion.
And there's another one that is $438 million. That's if they're to go with lesser troops. Because to intervene with military intervention is expensive. But you can also use non-military intervention to achieve the same thing if you plan it very well, and that is more inclusive. That's my whole point, that as ECOWAS, because of the complexities of our issues, we need to look for a non-kinetic means. Fund the standby force, not with so much money, more weapons, you have skilled officers and soldiers, that can do the job. But again, the reason why you don't want military people to intervene is because you're using your military to kill your own people. They are not enemies. When it comes to issues...
That was the argument that was made when
Yes.
Boko Haram started. And we have seen it grow exponentially. Oh, they are our own people. You cannot be killing your own citizens. But over the years, we have discovered that they are all not our citizens. And even if they were our citizens, they are not patriotic and loyal citizens of the country.
Yes. I totally agree with that, and that's why I said uh, issues like this are very difficult. At the beginning, it will be difficult for any military to kill its own citizen. That's the truth. You know, yes, later we found out that there are other elements in the Boko Haram that belong to other groups, and appropriate measures were taken against them. What I said is that before you intervene, you should always think about the exit strategy. Why the exit strategy is important is you kill your people, but they belong to families. Perhaps maybe one of them will surrender, or some of them will surrender, like we have over 100,000 surrendered Boko Haram now in the Northeast. What kind of justice system are you going to give them? Some have genuine reasons for surrendering. Some were coerced into joining the group, but they've killed. But they've been involved in some of these combatant activities. They have, at some point, they have to be reintegrated. It makes it difficult. I'm just pointing out facts as an expert to say, whatever we're doing, it's all good, but we should always think about the exit strategy, because that is what is called violence, increasing violence, when we don't look at all these things.
So, Paul, how do you, for instance, how does a country engage non-kinetically with a terrorist group or a terrorist organization, for instance, that threatens not just its sovereignty, but the peace and stability of that state?
The simple question, I hope you can hear me. The network has been terrible. The simple is to deliver good governance. Because you'll be surprised, why do we have these all these people, non-state actors that have small arms and light weapons? It's because there is no, the government that ought to regulate this or circulation of all this at times are the ones, politicians are the ones that are going to sponsor some groups because they want to win an election. And then after election, these people are now left with the guns. And when you have guns, guns cannot be idle. And in a place where you have unemployment, where you have people they can't go to school, young people are there, and then you cannot provide all the necessities of life. There is no electricity. That for people to even engage, self-employment. Children are out of school. They don't have jobs. You know, they say right mind is at the devil's workshop. So these are the politicians are the ones that are the drivers and facilitators of this. And when it now grows, it becomes the monster that you now want to fight with, going to buy guns, to fight guns that you allow to come into your country. Because if all the countries can do their needful at the border to make sure that the country, you do not let in illegal weapons. I mean, that circulation, you will now reduce crime, not only terrorism, but at least crime. So it is, and they are all interconnected. The fact that you are not delivering democracy have now made some people that feel alienated to now seek self-help. And how does that happen? If they see you are a politician driving a SUV, or even having a private jet, and they are there. A young man that has finished school cannot gain admission or get employment. He is a ready recruit, waiting to be recruited into whatever crime you want to do. So these are you don't now fight this by putting a superstructure on a weak structure. I tell you one thing, the insincerity of the political leaders across the region is that some of them, when they mention the issue of going to invade Niger, which said all this. One country for 100 or more. And then you can do that when you cannot fight, ask them to pay their dues in Ecowas. they probably have not paid. So there is the perfidy, the hypocrisy of these political leaders. They are the Christ. They are the problem. And unless and until they govern, they lead by example, and then to eliminate, lack, to reduce poverty, to make sure that they obey the rule of law, that they do not, carry out constitutional coups or ballot box coups by rigging elections. If they stop all those, let them change their attitude. If they do not do that, we will see going back to square one. So, it might sound far-fetched, but that is the foundation of the problem that nations have, and then the region has, now have. And you can see what is happening. The four countries that are now going.
Again, it's debatable, Paul, if you can hear us. It's debatable if indeed good governance alone could wish away crime, criminality, and terrorism that we now experience on a large scale in the sub-region. Some will say it is a case of the chicken and egg.
Good governance cannot wish it away. Good governance comes with having everybody doing their bit. The police people should do their own bit. Police, with civility. And then not being.
All right, let me throw that at you here, Mr. Balaji, because again we have lost Paul momentarily. Some would say, no, look, this is a question that is neither here nor there. Will good governance alone wish away crime? Will good governance alone wish away criminality and terrorism and the kind of arms trafficking and human trafficking, drug trafficking that obtains in the sub-region today? How do you get all of that away? Will good governance alone do it?
Of course, not alone, but it will set the pace for, it's a trajectory. When people see that something is good, it's a natural way of, to continue in that. It's the same way that violence is. When you see that this is the way out of poverty, crime, and it's popular, people follow. So it's about setting the balance. You're right, it's neither there nor here, but then it's about setting the pace. This is the way. So that's why you look at advanced countries. When you look at advanced countries also, there are different countries with different dimensions of security. I've been mentioning human security for a particular reason. If you see nations that actually follow this particular trajectory, their level of criminality, it's reduced. Take for countries in Northern Europe, for example. If you look at their budget, you will notice that their attention is about providing very good welfare for their people. So for you to enter such countries and you're an enemy, you don't need the police to arrest you. Your neighbor will know and will report to the police because you are disturbing their common wealth, their common enjoyment, and they won't allow you. So when you have a country or citizens that speak against their country, you know that you are at the height of bad governance. So what is supposed to be something that multiplies the good of everyone, multiplies crime among everyone. So that's my point, and I think that's the point that Paul is also trying to make. That we need to set that as our focus. Let's start. And then you see people, there's so many normal Nigerians. Nigerians are good people. In fact, the fact that we are still here with the kind of evil that has been done against us, like we peace practitioners will talk about, the reason why we're here is because of what we have done, what has been done against us, and what we have failed to do. And so if you look at things from these three dimensions, you know that some people will look at it for us to get back to this good governance approach we're talking about, we will need a good leader, we need revolution, we need all those kind of things. It may be that way. It may be other way. It may just be a good number of people taking the right step, and then pushing for it and for others to follow. But violence have a way of improving violence. I'm not saying violence is not important to deal with people who have decided to use violence against the state. We must. That's the reason why we have the military. And that's what they are trained for. But let's not use them for what they are not trained for, because it's going to be counterproductive. Let's use them for what they are trained for. Let's improve our police, the structure of our police. Let's give them more training. Let's improve our good governance. Let the judges do their work. Let the politicians do their work very well. Let the followers do their work. And let's see. It's then easy for all of us to see this is where the problem is, and we deal with it heads on.
All right, Paul, let's bring you back in now. You were addressing the issue of whether or not good governance alone can take away crime, criminality, and possibly terrorism, and of course arms trafficking, human trafficking, all those vices that have created security or insecurity in member countries and in the sub-region generally.
Thank you. Well, I'm really frustrated with the internet that is not allowing me to put across my thoughts. But Imani, good governance is not a slogan. It means that all the institutions of governance should do what they are supposed to do. You are a media man, you do your part. And my friend is a security expert. He does his part. The three arms of government should do what they are supposed to do: the legislature, the judiciary, and the executive. But you do not have a situation where some of these, you have one arm capturing two others. That's so much so that the judiciary or judges are now, you can now go and buy judgments. That is not good governance. Or you have legislators that are willing tools in the hands of the executive. Well, even when the executive, when they say jump, they say how high, and now put them to question. You find, look at some. I'm not saying that there is any perfect government anywhere, but look at the rigor. Look at what goes on in parliaments, at Congress. And the question time that if the government is trying to do anything, you have them, put on the line to say, how do you, if you're introducing anything, how are you going to fund it? It is not by fiat. It's not by somebody waking up and telling you, I want to do this, and then you do not hold them accountable. So accountability, making all the institutions of governance to work and letting every stakeholder do their part. Not the police. The army is meant to defend the sovereignty of the nation. They are not to govern. The police should be the one that will provide order, law and order. And then the executive should be doing what I'm going into all this simplistic thing to tell you that good governance is not a slogan. It is making sure that the structure, that the system works. All the structures, all the institutions are working. The law, the judiciary, it's not the one that you can buy. It's not the one where you have courts of coordinated jurisdiction issuing different judgments on a particular thing. It's not a place where elections are rigged and there is no consequence. It's not a place where people will disappear with billions of the money from the state treasury and nothing happens. There must be consequence for bad behavior. These are the elements of good governance. And if you don't get that right, be prepared for some people to come, non-state actors, to challenge a government that is not working. That is what we are having now. Not governing, they are not working. That is why it has all these problems and all these challenges. And unless and until we have that, we will continue to, tumble and stumble like one former Nigerian coach used to say. But it is unfortunate for a country like Nigeria that God has blessed with every talent, with the best brains in all aspects
All right. Again, network challenges. But on a final note, if you look carefully, the three former, well, should I say former now, ECOWAS member states of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger that have pulled out of the bloc have also now formed what they call Alliance of Sahel States. And that alliance is essentially a military alliance. So where does that where does that now come in terms of good governance in these three member states, in these three states of the Alliance of Sahel States? Because they are running away, for instance, from, say, an ECOWAS that is threatening to put in place a standby force. And here they have also now set up an alliance that is essentially a military alliance.
Let me say, I'm just trying to picture the map of West Africa and to see how effective this alliance can work. Honestly, if there is any prayer that can be my final note, is that ECOWAS should just come back together. It cannot work. It cannot work. It's only going to instigate more violence. You know, yes, that alliance was formed for protection, to be able to support one another when there is an insurgency, a terrorist activity, but mainly is to do without the ECOWAS sub-region. But I don't think it will stand. I think if ECOWAS Commission cannot work this out, other intergovernmental organizations can come in. There is no ECOWAS without those three nations.
Okay. Now, Paul, let's have your final thought. Put side by side the ECOWAS standby force and the Alliance of Sahel States, which is essentially a military alliance.
Okay,
To what purpose is that?
I will tell you without making any defense for military takeover of government. Military rule is an aberration and should not happen. But ECOWAS also made initial mistakes in the way it was trying to handle
Well, Paul, we do apologize for the poor network today, but at least the point has been made. As it were, the ECOWAS standby force, my panelists insist, is not the route to take at this point in time for the ECOWAS sub-region. And even so, for the three countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, that are pulled out of the ECOWAS bloc, which have also put in place an alliance of Sahel states, which is essentially a military alliance, as it were. Well, thank you so much for your time. We do hope we have a better network going forward. Paul Ejime is an international affairs analyst, and he's been joined by Mr. Kayode Bolaji, who is a security, governance, and foreign policy specialist. Join me here right in the studio. That's our program for today. Please join us again when we bring you a fresh edition of the program People, Politics, and Power. Bye for now.